This is an NBC Charlotte special report.
This spill, this gray water, this mess at the Dan River changed the landscape in North Carolina. Millions of gallons of coal ash spilling out of these dumps into the water.
I've never believed they're safe, and I definitely don't believe that they're safe now.
But that dump is half the size of this one right by the lake that 1 million people around Charlotte depend on for their drinking water.
What do we want? Clean water!
So the stakes here are huge.
We demand that you stop poisoning our water!
Yeah!
Why is this dump right by the lake? Why isn't Duke Energy moving it?
With respect to coal ash, we have no reason to believe anything Duke Energy tells us.
The challenge made a governor defensive.
Excuse me, sir, but you have not been recognized.
And put a multi-billion-dollar corporation on notice with the feds asking, should someone go to prison? Who's really looking out for your drinking water? Right now on a special edition of FlashPoint.
WCNC TV Charlotte. This is FlashPoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered. Now, this week's host, Stuart Watson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Watson, and this is the River Bend Steam Station. Behind it, 2 massive coal ash ponds. Behind that, Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for almost 900,000 of us in Charlotte and Gaston County. River Bend is closed now. It no longer burns coal to make electricity, but it's left behind tons and tons of coal ash, sprayed with water and dumped in ponds. Those ponds are twice the size of the ponds that spilled into the Dan River. The coal ash is held back by earthen dams, but those dams have broken before. In 2011, a coal ash pond at a power plant near Milwaukee broke, sending equipment and ash into Lake Michigan. And in 2008, when the coal ash pond next to a power plant in Tennessee burst, the flood destroyed or damaged 40 homes and put more than 1 billion gallons of ash into the river there. Duke insists that could not happen here, but environmentalists point out they said the same thing about the Dan River site, and there's a lot more at stake here.
So we're a lot closer, we've got a lot more ash, and we've got a lot more people to be impacted by that.
The NBC Charlotte I-Team has been covering the issue of coal ash, and River Bend in particular, for years now. But now that there's been an actual spill in North Carolina, we're going to take a half hour and ask a couple of critical questions. What should be done about the coal ash ponds here, and who's looking out for our drinking water? A security guard saw it first Sunday, February 2nd. The water level in the coal ash pond at Dan River was dropping. A day later, Duke told the public there'd been a spill. Tens of thousands of tons of coal ash turned the Dan River gray. It took Duke 5 days to plug the leak. A corrugated metal stormwater pipe, decades old and buried dozens of feet under the coal ash, had broken, and the coal ash flooded the river.
Coal ash failures are going to happen. Other kind of failures are happening. It's inevitable with this type of design of ash ponds.
Duke was quick to say it knew of no other similar stormwater pipes at any of its 30 other coal ash ponds around the state. But the coal ash ponds have hardly been foolproof, and for years Duke has made confident assurances that the coal ash ponds were safe.
We will certainly make sure that we have very high water quality and groundwater protection at the same time that we're able to perform that process as cost effectively as we can for our customers.
After the cleanup, attention quickly turned to other coal ash dumps, most notably River Bend because it sits on Mountain Island Lake, and because that lake provides drinking water to 4 cities: Charlotte, Belmont, Mount Holly, and Gastonia.
If that dam were to break and spill into the river, it would be completely uncontrollable.
The water intakes on Mountain Island Lake are closer to the River Bend coal dump than the water intakes on the Dan River, where treatment plants filtered out the coal ash and did not have to turn to bottled water.
It is unthinkable to store that much toxic substance in an unlined hole held back by an earthen dike next to the water reservoir for one of the major metropolitan areas of the United States.
The Catawba Riverkeeper and the Southern Environmental Law Center are suing Duke Energy over River Bend and other coal ash dumps. asking the power company to dry out the ponds, dig up the coal ash, and truck it to lined landfills that will not leak.
It's not cutting-edge technology. It's just basic common sense.
After a similar lawsuit in South Carolina, SCE&G settled, dried out its coal ash ponds, and is digging up the coal ash and trucking it elsewhere so it will not spill into the watery river.
Why do the people of North Carolina and the waters of North Carolina get less protection than the people of South Carolina?
Duke has balked at making a similar move, saying it wants to study the issue.
We don't act hastily. We base all of our decisions on science and engineering. That's the kind of business that we run.
And Duke has said that while it will pay for the Dan River cleanup, any removal of coal ash ponds could cost the ratepayers.
As you know, our customers pay our cost of operation, but it'll be the North Carolina Utilities Commission who decides how those costs, and if those costs, go to the customer.
The day after a hearing before state lawmakers, Duke announced a profit of $3 billion. Environmentalists say Duke should use some of those billions in profits to move the coal ash.
Duke, clean up your own mess!
But the state's top regulator, Secretary John Scavarla of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, first sided with Duke, saying coal ash removal required more study.
Their only acceptable remedy was dig them up, move them to lined landfills, and cover them. We're talking 14 facilities and 32 coal ash ponds. I can assure you it's not that simple. There's a lot of science that has to go into making those kind of determinations. There are environmental scientists who say that is the worst thing that could happen to the environment.
But this week, Governor Pat McCrory, himself a longtime Duke employee, wrote an urgent letter to Duke with Secretary Scavarla co-signing, saying we will not stand by while coal ash ponds remain a danger due to their proximity to the drinking water.
It's time for them to step up to the plate and take some action. Show not only me their plans, but the public their plans, first at Dan River and second at the other plants throughout North Carolina.
The coal ash spill puts our governor, Pat McCrory, in a tough political position because of his long-standing ties to Duke Energy and because a federal grand jury has launched a criminal investigation. We'll have more on that in a moment after we pause for your forecast from John Wendell in the First Warren Storm Center. We're back at the River Bend Steam Station on Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for most of us in the Charlotte area. And we're talking about the recent coal ash spill on the Dan River and its political fallout. The spill really put Governor Pat McCrory in a bind because McCrory worked for Duke Energy for 28 years. Duke and its executives were some of his leading campaign contributors, and because McCrory still holds an undisclosed amount of Duke's stock. But when reporters pressed him on the exact amount, he quickly got defensive. After the Dan River coal ash spill, Governor Pat McCrory visited the scene and called on his former employer to clean it up.
We've asked Duke, and they've agreed to this, to spare no expense in ensuring that they stop this leak and secure this ash pond, both now and for the future.
But when AP reporters asked McCrory in a news conference whether he had intervened on behalf of Duke in lawsuits over coal ash, McCrory denied involvement and referred questions to his Environment Secretary, John Scavarla.
My emphasis is right here on the storm. I'd be glad to have you talk to Secretary Scavarla regarding that, but I have had no conversations with Duke Energy about the lawsuits or about the federal action.
But when the questions kept coming from AP reporters, McCrory talked over them and shut them down.
I didn't, excuse me, sir, but you have not been recognized, okay? And I'd be glad to take any other, sir, excuse me, sir. I told you I'd get John Scavarla back with you, and we'd be glad to answer your questions, but it's no time to be disrespectful.
McCrory has always been prickly about his personal income and holdings, going all the way back to the campaign.
If you just go to the elections board right now, you know, and I ask all the reporters, it tells exactly who has paid me for the past year. It shows my stocks. It shows everything.
Doesn't show
it shows
how
my
much.
employers. It doesn't show how much, and frankly, I don't think that's your business, Stuart.
McCrory still owns over $10,000 in Duke stock, but he won't say exactly how much. Some environmentalists see this as a blatant conflict of interest. Attorney Frank Holloman at the Southern Environmental Law Center says McCrory is uniquely positioned to bring together state regulators and Duke to fix the coal ash dumps.
He appoints the head of Diener, and he worked for a long time for Duke Energy, and Duke Energy worked hard to elect him governor.
Democracy North Carolina, a campaign finance group, reported that as the coal ash controversy intensified last year, Duke gave another $437,000 to help GOP causes. But Duke has a track record of betting on winners, irrespective of political party, guaranteeing a $10 million line of credit to the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte that nominated Barack Obama for re-election. Inside North Carolina, the governor and his political party, the GOP, have more to lose from this coal ash spill, and here's why. A federal grand jury in Raleigh has issued 2 sets of subpoenas, one to Diener, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the other to Duke. That means the feds want to know if someone should go to prison. A letter from the U.S. Attorney says they've launched, quote, an official criminal investigation of a suspected felony. First, the federal grand jury subpoenaed records from Duke and from state regulators at Diener. Then they issued new subpoenas ordering more than a dozen state employees to testify, asking them whether anything of value changed hands between them and Duke Energy.
It's not just the company or organization that is at risk, it's the people or officers or managers who work there who are at risk too.
So far, nearly 24 federal subpoenas have been issued, but there's one group of people who have not been subpoenaed.
Have you been served a subpoena or anyone in your office?
No, I've not been served a subpoena, and no one that I have appointed or no one in my office has been served a subpoena.
At a news conference last week, Diener Secretary John Skvarla said he'd have no comment on the subpoenas. Now, the coal ash ponds here at Riverbend behind me are seeping into Mountain Island Lake. In a moment, we'll talk to a scientist who's tested that water and see what his findings mean for our drinking water supply as FlashPoint continues. We're back at the Riverbend Steam Station wrestling with the environmental question of what to do with coal ash after a recent spill on the Dan River. It might be helpful at this point to just take a minute and talk about how we got here and where all this coal ash comes from. Duke brings coal by the trainload down to North Carolina from places like West Virginia. It burns that coal in steam stations. The burning coal heats water. That's why Duke built coal-fired plants by rivers and lakes, lots of water. And the water becomes steam. Most of what you see coming out of smokestacks is not smoke, it's steam. The steam is turning giant turbines inside, and the turbines generate our electricity. You plug in your computer or your cell phone, you're connecting to coal. And after the coal is burned, what's left is ash. At newer plants, that ash is dry and trucked out to lined landfills, but at the older plants, Duke sprayed the ash with water so it became a kind of sludge. And Duke dumped that coal ash sludge in unlined ponds right by the water at places like Riverbend.
In the 1950s, the goal was to get the ash out of the air. It was a solution to that problem, and it's what humans do. We bury our trash and try to forget about it. But 60 years later, you know, it's just outdated technology, really.
Now, we followed water samples taken from the lake behind these coal ash dumps to a sophisticated lab at Duke University to talk to the scientists there about what his findings mean for our drinking water supply.
I'm going to take y'all straight to the ash ponds.
Sam Perkins tests the water quality on Mountain Island Lake, the sole source of drinking water for most of Charlotte.
This is one of the seepages right here. That's not coming out of the permitted discharge.
Water from the coal ash ponds is seeping through an earthen dam about 80 feet high beside the Riverbend Steam Station.
This is one of multiple points around the perimeter where the coal ash pond behind that berm is leaking through groundwater and coming out right here.
In that water, pollutants like arsenic at many times the EPA limits for drinking water.
Arsenic is a carcinogen. It can also cause skin irritation and a number of other issues.
150 miles east at Duke University, researchers use sophisticated equipment to track arsenic.
This is the source when we put the water sample.
Geochemist Avner Vingosh used this mass spectrometer to find a kind of fingerprint, tracing the arsenic in the lake to the arsenic from the coal ash.
In addition, we can tell this is coming from coal ash and not coming from other source, stormwater, wastewater, or other potential source of contamination.
Dr. Vingosh tested the so-called effluent, that's the stream rushing out of the outfall at the coal ash ponds.
What we found that the effluent, the outfall, contains high level of arsenic.
By the time the runoff reaches Charlotte's water intake about 3 miles downstream, it's, well, watered down. How worried should you be?
Well, that's a tough one. I think for drinking water, our data showing has not reached to the level of concern.
But Vingosh says under extreme conditions like a drought, the arsenic in the muck outside the water intake could erupt into the raw water supply.
The way I would describe it, we're living kind of next to a volcano. It could erupt any time. Right now, we are in good shape.
CMUD treats the raw water before we drink it at giant water treatment plants like this one on Highway 16. And the utility can take out the arsenic, but it'll cost you.
Expensive, yes. I think the notion that coal is cheap is not true.
Duke Energy has done its own testing of the water coming from the coal ash ponds.
We are required to do routine monitoring. I can see it done every day. The water quality's been good, continues to be good.
Even if you can't find the toxic substance in the water at a particular time in the water column, it's heavy metals. They sink. It's gathering in the sediment.
And if you look back through satellite photos on Google Earth, you'll see Duke has already dug some coal ash out of Riverbend when the ponds filled up in 2006 and 2007.
It's something they've done before. We're asking them to go deeper and remove a little bit more of it.
If they determine that excavation is the best option to protect the water quality, then that's what we'll do.
But environmentalists want the leaking to stop now, and they know it'll take years to dig out all that ash.
We realize it cannot be done overnight.
So they're again turning to the courts, just like they did in South Carolina, this time to prod Duke to clean up its act. And it's not just the courts.
What do we want? Clean water!
Some protesters are taking to the streets. Why the issue of coal ash is not just for so-called tree huggers anymore, when FlashPoint concludes. We have a catchphrase for people who care about coal ash and drinking water. We call them tree huggers. But you let someone spill tons of coal ash into your drinking water supply, a lot more of us look a lot like a tree hugger. NBC Charlotte has followed one family who lives in this community for years who knew about coal ash before any of their neighbors.
I have pet turtles that I get from here.
Anna Binky, her friend Maddie, Mom Sarah, and Dad Dave all live on Mountain Island Lake. And Mountain Island Lake lives next to the Riverbend steam station.
I can see it from my bedroom window.
Anna wakeboards here, paddles here, skis here.
We swim here, and it's just, we can't swim in a dump.
So when it came time for her 6th grade science project, Anna and her friend Maddie decided to test the water for arsenic.
Because it's our drinking water and it's right beside where I live.
It's not just Anna's drinking water. Charlotte, Gastonia, Mount Holly, Belmont all draw most of their drinking water through intakes, like giant straws slurping the water out of Mountain Island Lake.
All right, I need everybody to sit down.
Anna's school is named for the lake, Mountain Island Charter.
We tested the arsenic levels closer and higher to the Riverbend power plant, which is just down the road.
And even though many of these students pass by the Riverbend plant on the way to school, Anna says most people don't think about it.
The ash ponds in Mountain Island Lake are not lined and drain into the lake, which is our drinking water.
Since there's no lining, no barrier, the coal ash ponds seep into the lake through the ground. And they gush directly into the lake through a stream called an outfall. At the outfall, Anna and her partners found arsenic at levels 20 times the EPA limit for drinking water.
This is what comes out of those ash ponds. My name is Anna Binky.
The year before, Anna complained straight to Duke's CEO, Jim Rogers.
I don't want to drink ashes from coal. That's gross.
We caught up with Anna after, having chicken fingers with her mom at the Midnight Diner.
Just what did you basically want Mr. Rogers to know?
I just wanted to ask him when or if he will close down the plant, and was just stating why.
I think I'm an environmentalist at heart. Our position on a lot of environmental issues reflect that. So I want to get it right, because part of my legacy is getting it right.
And sure enough, as Jim Rogers retired, Duke retired Riverbend, 2 years ahead of schedule. But the problem of the coal ash remained.
I'm Sarah Benke. I live on Mountain Island Lake, right near this coal plant, Riverbend.
The Benkes started protesting the coal plant because Anna's mom, Sarah, got cancer.
I am a mom. I am a cancer survivor. I am concerned about my health.
But Sarah wasn't always a protester.
Hello.
This suburban mom began organizing her neighbors.
So I'm just really excited that you guys all came and that you're all concerned about this too.
Holding meetings in her home and taking to the streets to alert the public there could be more than coal ash dumped in those ponds.
They can put boiler slag, they can put cleaning solvents, they can put sewage, they can put lab waste in here. We have no idea what is truly lurking in these ash ponds. They're just big pits in the ground that they've been dumping stuff in for half a century.
CMUD, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Utilities District, regularly tests the drinking water for contaminants.
Copper, zinc, arsenic.
So far, they haven't spotted any. And yet, the Dan River spill was a kind of wake-up call to the public and to Duke.
And it took a disaster to get them to say that they would take a fresh look at these.
The spill was more than a scare. It's a kind of teachable moment that the issue of coal ash isn't just for tree huggers.
I get so frustrated when people say, oh, this is a bunch of environmentalists that are upset about this. This is an economic issue as well. Look at what happened in West Virginia. If people don't have clean water, it is bad for business in North Carolina.
Anna's reason for fighting coal ash is a little different than her mom's.
Let people know that kids have a voice too.
Because when it comes to the long-term cost of coal ash, it's her generation that will pay the price. Now the legislature, the governor, the public is paying a lot more attention to coal ash in drinking water. Let's hope there's a workable solution before another disaster, because safe, fresh drinking water is about as basic a human need as it gets. If you have thoughts and ideas, please share them with us through Twitter, Facebook, and by email. We've covered this issue for years, and we don't plan to stop now. Dave Wagner is back from the Winter Games in Sochi. He'll be in this spot next week. Until then, thanks for watching.